We're going to go over to Titti. Titti, before you ask your question, I just had a quick comment, Tom, because so I've noticed somebody in my life who's like super evolved. I feel like I just see he's very kind and thoughtful of others. He's my fiance. And I've also been like, read MBT. Come on, Will, read it. And he's like, sure, for you, I'll read it. But he hasn't even gotten through book 1. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. And I'm like, why? But like, you're so evolved. You should resonate with this. And he's like, yeah, I'm not sure. And I'm like, so what do you believe then? Like, what do you think happens after this lifetime? He's like, well, nothing. I'm like, nothing? How can you believe there's nothing? I'm like, what motivates you to make good choices? Because he makes really good choices, low entropy choices. I'm like, you need a reason, like you just do it. And he said, well, he's like, my reward for being a good person is a good life. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's really simple. But then a part of me is curious. I'm like, but why aren't you drawn to like understanding the nature of reality and metaphysics? And like, he's very different than for me in that sense. So
the reason that he's not drawn to that is he doesn't need to be drawn to that. The understanding, the intellectual understanding of how it all works is not really important. What's important is that you be it, that you be kind, that you be caring, that you that you grow, that you know that that is the right path. You do things because they're right, not because they're easy or not because it's good for you, but because it's the right thing to do. And understanding that in some sort of model or structure is really not relevant. So he doesn't need to know that. He doesn't have to go there first. Now, a lot of people go there first. They get the understanding, oh, look, there's a system and it's all about growing up and it's about love. And well, I should work on that. And then they work on it from that viewpoint. And the structure helps them understand it. And they, in their intellect, in their intuitive part, kind of go on the journey together. But some people never have to go there. They don't have to have any structure at all. They just know intuitively, they know that the right thing to do is to be caring, is to be kind. And that does give you a good life, because whenever you're upset and annoyed and angry and all that negative stuff, life is terrible. Life isn't fun. And when you just let people be whoever they are and you try to help and try to be part of the solution, then life is good. And that's all you need to know. Anything else is superfluous. So, he's not drawn to it because he doesn't need it. It's not significant to him. He doesn't need a structure to convince him that this is important and that he should do these things to grow up. He knows they're important, and that's what he should do. And he doesn't need to know why. He just does it. So that's why. And it's true of a lot of people. There are people who go into a traditional religious path and they don't get swept up by the dogma. They don't get swept up by the social scene, by doing it because everybody else is. They actually get into that because they feel like kindness and being helpful to people is just the right thing to do. And that religious system supports that. So they just do it. And the dogma, who cares? All the belief stuff, who cares? They're not interested in any of that. But they can get, they can grow up and be very well grown within a religious context and never get lost in the dogma. Some people do that. And they will see themselves as religious, but they're really not religious, because religion is mostly about believing dogma. But they've captured the meaningfulness of it, and they go with that. They don't feel better than anybody else. They don't feel only their way's right way, and everybody needs to believe what they believe. They don't have any of that, downside. So sometimes people do that, and it doesn't matter that they don't really have a structure to pin it on. But
Yeah.
people who are more left brain, more technical, tend to, and who are also grown up, tend to not be religious, but just tend to be ethical. And they do things because they're right. It's just easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he resists it, because he doesn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways that's positive too, because then you're not living out of the intellect so much. It's more coming from this like knowing, this being.
Yes, right. So it works out fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Tom. Over to you, Titti.
Thank you. I have a question about the nature of fears, because you have the fundamental fears, like the fear of the unknown, the fear of not being in control, and the fear of not being good enough, and all of those. And they have their expressions that creates negativity in our daily life. But sometimes you have talked about the roots of the fears. And then I'm sort of wondering, are they sort of hanging underneath the fundamental fears, or are you then referring to the fundamental fears when you talk about the roots?
I'm talking about the fundamental fears and basically where they come from in this particular experience, this particular experience packet. So if you come here and you're not too grown up and you have fears, you would tend to be a fearful person. You were in the last lifetime. So you kind of start there. You haven't grown up too much yet, which is like most everybody, right? If you're like most everybody and you have these fears that you need to deal with, then there'll be something that will trigger them. There'll be some sort of an event or some sort of thing that will trigger them. Like, you feel like you've been set aside or not paying attention to, or your parents tell you to go away and be quiet because they're busy too many times. So you start feeling insecure about that. Oh, I'm not good enough. So you start thinking that way because I'm constantly being pushed away. So that's, if I were better, they wouldn't feel that way. So you start internalizing that. Well, that's that fear of inadequacy, of not being good enough. And now the roots of it in this lifetime are going to be in your childhood, where that fear was triggered, was blossomed, came out according to that experience. So that's what I talk about. Go down, back to the roots of it. Typically, I mean, to the bottom. And that is the basic fear. But it may have, in your experience in this lifetime, its roots may be in your childhood. For most people, it is. So you can find it there. But the deeper roots are just in your consciousness. The deeper roots are, you just haven't grown up past that yet. That's where that is. But you don't really have access to that very much. You do have access to your past, to your childhood. So I don't know if that helps or not, but by root, I mean, you go to the source. You go to the source of it. Well, the deeper source is just, it's fear that develops because you haven't outgrown having fears yet.
Oh, that's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, your consciousness, and you have potential. Now, things happen in your experience and you express that potential. If that potential is not very grown, then you express a lot of those things that happen to you in your experience fearfully. Things become, you see yourself as being inadequate. You see yourself as being at risk. You have fears. Okay. If you have a potential that's more evolved, you have a potential that's more low entropy, those same things happen to you, but you don't see them as scary. You don't You don't interpret them as that. Instead of saying, oh, mom and dad, I'm not good enough to get their attention, you just say, well, they're busy. Inside you feel you're plenty good enough. They're just busy. You see, whereas if you haven't evolved to that point, instead you say, oh, I'm not good enough. Yes, it's my fault, my failure, that sort of thing. So it just depends on how much you've evolved. And we're all in this process of evolving. We all have fears, we have ego, we have beliefs, and we struggle with those things, and we're trying to get rid of them. And when we come back next time, if we've been successful at getting rid of them, well, the things that triggered us last time, and we wrap those fears around in our new experience, we won't think of them that way anymore. The same things may happen, but we won't wrap them with fear because we won't have that in our potential. So the real roots of the fear is just in our consciousness. We're just trying to outgrow them. But then when we come here, we take that fear and we wrap it around some part of our experience that kind of triggers that fear. And we express, see, we get to interpret our reality, right? Information comes, we interpret it. So when mom and dad shoo us away constantly because they're busy, because this just happens to be a very busy time for mom and dad, maybe they're moving or building a new house, or maybe they have other people in their family, their immediate family, that are sick or something. They're just busy. And instead of interpreting that as, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm being pushed away, we interpret that as, oh, they're busy. How could I help? Well, maybe I could help just by leaving them alone and entertaining myself and finding something happy to do. And I'll go do that and let them work on their problem. You see, it's how you interpret it. So that's the thing. So if you take your experience and you interpret it, if you see the negative, if you have a tendency to see things in a negative light, it's all about me. See, that's being self-centered. Oh, they're not paying attention to me. It must be about me. If everything's about you because you're self-centered, then you also find yourself to be at fault for everything. So that's really what I mean about fear. So the fear is just our expressing our quality in our experience. We have experiences because we interact with other people, be they parents or siblings or bosses or neighbors, or coworkers, whatever. We have experiences with them, and we get to interpret what that experience means to us. And if we interpret it negatively, oh, so-and-so, she said that, and that was a put down. And wow, she shouldn't have said that about me, and I'm angry. Well, you don't have to interpret it that way. You could say, oh, she said that. Well, gee, she must not be feeling too good today. I bet she's having a problem. But I'm feeling good. I wonder what I can do to help her out. You see, it's just a different way of interacting with the same information. So the fears are part of us, and we just need to get rid of it and become a different person without that fear. So we're taking our consciousness and lowering its entropy and changing it. We're becoming somebody else that doesn't have that fear. Next time, we'll have a whole new set of experiences, and we'll have to interact with them, and we'll interpret them some way or another. If we interpret them negatively, then we'll have fear, and we'll be upset, and we'll have anger, and we'll have all that to deal with. If we don't interpret them negatively, then we won't. We won't have any of that. We'll look back and say, oh yeah, my childhood was really great. I had a wonderful childhood. Oh yeah, mom and dad were both drug addicts, and we lived in a little hovel with dirt floor, but we had it was really a good time. I had good friends. I went to good schools, and everything was fine. You get to see the world differently and interpret it differently. That's why when you come back the next time, you're much quicker at figuring things out because you're already there. You just have to re-express it in terms of new experience. So does that help, Titti?
Yeah, it helps a lot. I got a new perspective on fears actually, so that was very helpful. Yeah, but I was also thinking a little bit, because when you do fear work, I sometimes attack them by the roots or whatever you call it.
Mhm.
But sometimes I work with the behavior or their expression.
Mhm.
For instance, let's say arrogance, or let's say jealousy or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they come from the same thing, but I noticed that I can work on a behavior or a reaction or a negative
Right.
reaction
Mhm.
over and over and over, and it disappears eventually. So then I guess the fundamental fear has become a little bit smaller. Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe even gotten rid of. But yeah, it becomes a little bit smaller. And you can work at the behavior and work at at that level. That's a good place to work. You don't if you can dig down, grab it by the roots and rip it up, that's quick. But it doesn't always work.
Yeah, but
You're
how do
not
you do
always
that?
able to
Because
do that.
yeah.
Everybody's not able to do that all the time, because a lot of times you can't see what the roots are because you have the fear. It's hard to see it from the outside, to go pull it up by the roots. You really have to get outside of yourself, see yourself from the outside, not just from the inside. It's hard to do as an insider. But when you meditate, sometimes you can think of yourself in the third person. You think of yourself as, oh, that's Titti, and she's this that way. You kind of get outside of yourself and your perspective. Well, if you can do that, then you have a better chance of pulling them up by the roots. But if you can't get outside of yourself, it's a very difficult thing to do. And you're better off just to do as you're doing, deal with the behavior, but not in a way that you're acting, but in a way that you're really being. You're getting rid of it, not just forcing yourself to smile when you don't feel like it. It's really getting rid of it. Either way works fine. It's a little slower if you do it the other way, but it's kind of the way most people have to work with it is through behavior. That's kind of typical.
It sounds very tempting to just drag them out by the roots.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something that I really would like to do.
Yeah. Well,
But
then you really have to own it. You have to really own it. You have to understand it. You have to really be aware of that fear, just spend some time saying, what is this fear? Why do I feel that way? Where does it come from? What does it do? How is it affecting my choices? And really get to know that fear. Then you have a better chance of ripping it out by the roots, all in one fell swoop, getting rid of it and saying, okay, I see it. I see how my childhood, convinced me that I was inadequate. And then I see how I cover up that inadequacy by being arrogant, by knowing everything, and by having to have my way and that sort of thing. And then once you see that, you can just sometimes quit right there and it's gone. The whole fear can just disappear, almost like magic. But that's not the way it works for most people most of the time, but it can work that way. And it's worth a try because that's the more direct way. But the typical way is that you work on it and work on it and work on it until finally it goes away.
Yeah, I could give it a try, and you could also have an intention of just dragging it out and see what happens. If it
Have
works,
that
maybe it
intention.
works. Yeah.
Keep that intention, not just a one-time thing though, but if you have that intention, keep that intention in the front of your mind, keep that on your mind. So many times a day, you just think, I'm going to tear that fear out by its roots. I'm just going to get rid of it. It's just going to be gone. And 10, 20 times a day, just have that thought. It only takes 10 seconds to have the thought. Just keep that thought in your mind. And that's the advantage of using your intent to modify future probability. That will work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm eager to get started.
Great question. I think, Tom, too, you really nailed it when you said it's all about owning it, right? Like owning that fear and not projecting it or making it somebody else's fault.
Yes, it's yours. Yeah, you have to own it. Yeah, if you're going to tear it up by the roots, you really have to understand it. You have to own it. It has to be yours. You have to be able to, again, you see yourself kind of from the third person. You know, you're outside of yourself, looking in at yourself, and you're able to more objectively see yourself that way. And you can see all the choices that you've made because you had that fear, all the things you've done, the way you've interacted with people, the relationships you've had, and you see all this stuff and you go, oh man, you know, this fear has really just, you know, been hard on my life and on my growth, and it's just gotten in the way, and I've made such terrible choices because of it. And that starts to, that's what I mean by owning it, to where you really, it's yours and you understand it and you know what it's done and what it's been and how it is. And now it's easier just to get rid of it at that point.
Whereas I think before we think it's easier to just put it on somebody else. I just real quick, I had this happen the other day where my fiance were going for a walk and he said something. I was talking about a charity event and I said, it's going to be a lot of work. And he goes, well, you can delegate it to your team. And I got super offended by that one comment. I'm like, so you think I'm not doing a good enough job as it is? Like, why would you say that? Why do you always say that to me? And I got really, really worked up. And he was just like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it. And finally, by the end of the walk, we got back in the car. I realized, I'm like, yeah, that has nothing to do with him. That's all me. Like, that's my insecurities that got triggered because I think I'm not good enough. So I'm assuming that he thinks I'm not good enough. And then when I owned it, I actually got really emotional, and because I was sitting with my fear of inadequacy, my fear of not good enough, and I wanted to cry because I was like face to face with it, and I just I was just with it, accepted it, and let the emotion run through me, and then talk to him about it. And for me, that's kind of the process of letting go of that fear.
Yeah, well, that's what that fear does. You know, everything. When you feel inadequate, everything's about you. You know, when somebody says something, well, why don't you do this? What you hear is, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
You need to do it some other way. You know, you hear criticism when there is no criticism, but you interpret it that way because in your mind, you're really not good enough and you deserve criticism. But then when you hear it, it makes you angry, you see? So yes, that's the way that works. And it's just a fear that makes you interpret your experience in a negative way. Somebody says something and you hear the negative. You interpret it to be the problem.
Yeah, in a way, it was helpful that happened because I could see it and do something with it, rather than it, because the fear is there and it needs to come out. So yeah. I'm glad that it came out in a safe space like that, so I could deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. I read in a book an account of something like that I remember because it's very amusing, and that's this lady who also felt insecure and had feelings of being inadequate. She's sitting in the kitchen doing paperwork or doing some sort of thing, and her husband comes in, he opens the refrigerator and he says, oh, there's no bologna in the refrigerator. And she says, well, if you want bologna, why don't you go get it yourself? What do you think I am? I'm in charge of your bologna? Do you think, do I have to, do everything for you? Can't you do anything for you? And she goes into this big, 10-minute rant about him demanding that she keep bologna in the refrigerator. And at the end of it, he says, I just wanted you to know that there wasn't any bologna in the refrigerator. And, so that sort of thing happens. Yeah, where you find the negative, you look for the dark lining in every cloud. And then you grab that and you apply it to yourself because you know at some deep level that you're inadequate and you deserve criticism. At the same time, it makes you angry that somebody would criticize you. So it's just the way that feeling inadequate, plays out. And that's true not only of you, Vanessa, but of a very large majority of the population works that same way. And you're lucky that you have, you know, your fiance who just lets you be.
Yeah.
There's Vanessa gone off on a, you know, on a negative.
All crazy again.
Yeah, going off on this negative thing, and oh well, that's just the way she is. It's okay, but I still love her anyway. You know, she'll grow up or not, but it doesn't matter. That's just my Vanessa. So you're lucky that he doesn't, you see, get angry. Why are you getting angry at me? You know, I was just trying to be helpful.
Right. And
Stop
that's what
being
I'm used
helpful.
to.
Stop trying to fix things.
Yeah.
You know, just
And
leave me alone.
that's like the common human condition is most of us are riddled by fear. So when one person gets triggered, the other person does. And then you
Yes,
can't,
exactly.
yeah, you can't heal from your own fear because it's now tangled up in this other person's fear. And it's
exactly, that's what happens. Yes.
Yeah. So we need more love-based people to help the rest of us out of our fear.
Yes, exactly, that's what happens. The fear bangs up against fear. And it just brings the negative potential out, and that positive potential just lies on the floor. You know, nobody even picks that up or sees it. It's all just negative. That's why most people's lives are struggles and have a lot of unhappiness. And they see all of these things in life that are just unfair to them, and people who just keep saying negative things to them. And why are you always criticizing me and putting me down, you know, kind of thing. And nobody may be criticizing you at all. It's you that see your experience as put downs and as problems. And even if somebody is trying to put you down, so what? It's them. That's their problem. You see, it's not your problem. So even if somebody is being rude and negative towards you, it doesn't matter because you're okay and you know you're okay. So see, it just, not only does it get you out of a negative reaction, but it puts you into a positive reaction no matter what the situation is. Whether somebody's really trying to put you down or not, it's still okay because you know you're okay. You don't feel insecure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Let's go over now to Ricardo with the next question.
Okay, thank you, Titti. Thank you, Vanessa. Sorry. Tom, my question is not exactly personal. I always wonder about your project. I think it is of utmost importance to humanity. And we have such inertia as a society in general in the world that changing for the best is always a slow process. I think it is crucial that this belief that is very deep in the mind of everyone, that science is not in accordance with the existence of something that is not matter. That is a belief that is very ingrained. That is what I call scientism, not science, not scientism. In other words, materialism. So deeply ingrained. I think that for mankind in general, the solution is to go exactly through what science is malinterpreted, and to give science a good interpretation. So using, like they say, using fire to fight fire, using science to fight scientism, for instance. So that is your effort. We are trying to show with better experiments that this materialism also is not the reality, but the reality is consciousness, right? That is what you're trying to prove to the world, I think. And we are helping, I hope, little grains of sand we're putting with this with these tasks we do in your group. Um, my question would be, what is your prospect for the future? Uh, the ideal situation would be that your experiments are successful, they have a resonant spreading for all over the world. People start looking at this and saying, well, we're always wrong. Matter is not the supreme, but the supreme is consciousness. And so this has to change the whole outlook of me as a person, of everyone, of humanity in general. So the outlook has to change. As a consequence, people would become better people. People would be centered in what is real, that life doesn't end here in matter, and so on. All the natural, almost automatic consequences. But for some reason or other, it is not happening fast as we would like to see. Uh, well, when your experiments are done and they spread on the world thanks to the internet and the means we have today, um, I hope the change in the change in the outlook of humanity should change substantially and hopefully quickly. But I would like to know, what is your prospect about this? Well, do you think it would we have chances that this is going to happen in the right way and in the right time, or maybe you see many hurdles on the way, so that the process may be hampered, slowed, or even closed? Is that danger existent, or you see a good prospect ahead?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm very positive. I see a good prospect ahead. And in the not too distant future, by that, I mean, probably by the middle of, the century, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, something like that, which is near term. In the big picture, that's just an eye blink. That's not very far downstream. So I see, that's what I mean when I say the near future. I don't mean tomorrow or next week. I mean in the next probably 2 to 5 decades. I see that there's a good possibility that we could take a giant step forward. We've been taking little baby steps now for a very long time, but I think we can maybe take a big step forward in the near future, because all the right pieces to make that happen have come together. It's all here. Things, we now have things we never had before, like an internet where ideas and concepts can spread very widely, very quickly. And we haven't had that before. We have a population that is really kind of tired of the dysfunction that they've been living with. I think if you just randomly sampled, 1,000 people around the planet, you'd find that almost all of them say, things are broken. We're not doing nearly, humanity, are not doing nearly as well as we should. Things are not, the systems, the ideas, the infrastructure, and the institutions that we have now need to change. We're very suboptimal for what we could be doing as a species, how we could be interacting with each other. So I think we have widespread awareness of the problem. And what we just need to do is get a widespread awareness of the solution. And I think the internet, and I like your term of doing real science to dispel scientism, with this scientist as, a belief-based science rather than a science-based science. And I think that's that's really well put. We need science to dispel scientism. But I think that's probably going to happen. I see that growing toward that. Every decade, I see a pretty significant change in scientific attitudes. When I published these books in 2003, there was me and maybe 2 other people around the world who kind of agreed. This is science, like science people, scientists who agreed that this was a virtual reality based on information and that materialism was a wrong idea. There were probably more than that, but only a few that actually then went to the virtual reality idea. But in any case, now there's 100 times as many, in 2 decades. It's gone up by several orders of magnitude. There's a whole lot of people now, whereas before there were very, very few. Now I'm thinking 30% of the younger physicists probably realize that reality is information-based. They just don't know how to go past that statement. That's as far as they can go with it. It's information-based. They don't know what the next step is. But I think in the next decade or so, we can show them what the next step is, and that there is a science of the subjective as well as the science of the objective. And all of those, the objective and the subjective sciences both meet in one science. And I think that will, within the next, within the next 2 to 5 decades, I think that will become mainstream. And once it becomes mainstream, everything's going to change very quickly, probably over 1 or 2 decades, once we get those concepts into the mainstream. We've always had people who understood the big picture and what reality was about. The one I always point to is, Buddha explained this virtual reality as an illusion 2,500 years ago. So we've always had people, and Buddha wasn't the only one. Obviously, there've been people at all times, in all countries, all places that had big pictures, but they've never gotten into the mainstream. They've always been little bubbles of enlightenment out in the margins. And once this gets into the mainstream, big changes will take place that will be permanent, I think, and that will last. So getting it into the mainstream, I think, is going to be because the scientists realize a bigger picture. Now, right now, they don't realize a bigger picture, but I think that's coming. And so I'm very positive. When we do, our world will, within a decade or 2, lose much of its meanness, much of its belligerence, much of its control, power, force ethic. Much of that will reduce. So I think we can do that. Now, I just say that it's a possibility, and it's a possibility that I didn't think existed before. There just wasn't a mechanism before to get it into the mainstream. The mainstream, the mainstream. Go ahead.
No, that is a point of your work, I think. Yes. Yeah. There wasn't a means to get into the mainstream.
Yeah, because in the mainstream, you don't have people who are really interested very much in, the nature of reality. If you just go out and find 1,000 people someplace and say, hey, all of you 1,000 people, how many of you are interested in the nature of reality? You may get 1 or 2 hands come up out of 1,000, but that would be about all you'd get. People just aren't interested in the nature of reality because they're interested in how they're going to pay the mortgage, the relationships they have, their kids they're raising, people are just so consumed with their material functions and the things that they're doing and the choices they're making and their anger, their upset, their annoyance. They're so consumed with that they don't really have any thoughts whatsoever about the bigger picture. So to get mainstream, you have to get to those people. The people like everybody here today are people who are seekers, who people are interested in big pictures, who do think about deep thoughts, who do want to know what's truth and from what's false. It's a different kind of person, but that's a minority. So that's why it's never gotten into the mainstream. The mainstream just isn't interested. They're not grown up enough yet. They're too consumed with everyday ego and everyday beliefs and their fears to think about big pictures, to care about big pictures. So to get in the mainstream, you're going to have to get to those people who don't care at all about the big picture. And the one way to do that is to have science embrace it. Because if the scientists say that it's so, then it's so. And the logical consequences of that will be accepted by people in the mainstream. So I think that's how we're going to get it into the mainstream, is through science. But that's just my hope. Maybe that's me just as a scientist thinking that that's the way it's going to work. But that's where I see it going, because the scientists are now the people who tell the common person what's true. They're the people that are looked up to know the truth. So if they say this is a virtual reality, consciousness is fundamental, then it will go mainstream. If they don't say that, it'd still be relegated into the margins. So yes, I think that will happen, and hopefully near term.
Great. By the way, Tom, thank you for your answer. I'm glad to know that prospect. I wanted to thank you because this little piece of information you gave a while ago about using your imagination as a tool, just playing with your imagination when you try to open up the window, so to speak, to the other frames of reality, using your imagination to play with it, and until it becomes natural and intellect stops being an obstacle. Well, thank you for that piece.
You're welcome. Yeah, that's a good way to get past that hurdle of going from here to there. It works pretty well. And the more you work with that imagination and get used to interpreting things in terms of sense data, the easier it gets, and actually the more vivid your dreams will become. They will become richer at the same time. And once you have that practiced, the letting go will be so much easier. The grabbing hold of another storyline will be so much easier. And then it'll just seem natural. Your storyline will just bleed into the system storyline. Yeah, it's a good tool.
Thank you, Tom.
Andre, it's all you.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, Tom. So my question is about needs, unmet needs, and letting go of needs. I would like to know your take on this. So we could divide needs between those that have more of a connection to physical health, like need for food, water, shelter, and so on, and those that have a connection to mental and emotional health, like understanding, love, connection, need for contribution, need for identity, autonomy, need for purpose, need for pleasure and entertainment, comfort. So my question is, when to embrace our needs and when to let them go? Do we need to let go of certain needs to take a more optimal path of growth? And well, maybe these are many questions already, but in case you can answer this too, like when to let go of unmet needs, like shall we pursue them or shall we let them go?
I think pursuing a need is probably not a good thing to do. I think if you care about others, if you get rid of your fears as much as you can, get rid of your beliefs, ego, you will find that life just automatically fulfills all your needs. Your needs will just be met. Your needs may shift a little bit here and there, but I think you will feel like all your needs are met satisfactorily. When you pursue a need, I think that's like pursuing happiness. It doesn't work out very well. And the harder you try to pursue it, the more distant it gets, the further away it gets. It's like you just can't get from here to there. It seems impossible. If you try to pursue happiness, and by pursue it, I mean the way most people would pursue it, through the intellect, doing those things through the intellect that you think would make you happy, then it turns out it doesn't really make you happy. Like, I'd be happy if I had $1 million to spend. Well, you find out it doesn't really make you happy after all. But if you just are caring and loving and giving, you probably will be happy. And all those other needs, the satisfaction, the being a contributor, the relationship, all those things just fall into place. So I think your needs are something that takes care of itself as you evolve the quality of your consciousness. And if you're not evolved and have a lower quality of consciousness, they just are prickly. They're like burrs under your shirt. They're just annoying things that are going to keep aggravating you because you have a low quality of consciousness. Whereas you grow up, those things will just disappear and needs will be met. So I'd say you don't pursue your needs. Let them happen, and let them happen just as a consequence of you growing up. And I can't think of any situation where you would grow up and your needs would not all be met. I think some of the needs that you might have now before you're grown up would just change. The way you need things now, you just wouldn't need them anymore. That sort of thing is kind of a projection of what you think you'd like. It's sort of like being the millionaire. It's those things you think you really would be wonderful and great if you had them. But once you get there, they're not really all that important after all. So the kind of needs that you were aware of would probably change significantly. So that would be my thought, Andres, that it'll all take care of itself as you grow up. You don't actually have to do anything about it. Same with happiness.
Well, that sounds fantastic. All right. Thank you very much for your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.